Hi, and welcome to the Palestine Solidarity Telesummit. I'm Katie Miranda, and today I'm here with Sam Bahour, a business development consultant living in Ramallah. Sam frequently provides independent commentary on Palestine and serves as a policy director for Ashabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. So, Sam, your family background and history as a Palestinian is complicated. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? You were born in the US, but you live in the West Bank. Can you tell us how you ended up in the West Bank working on the development of the Palestinian economy?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. I guess from a personal perspective, my personal family history is not any more or less complicated than most Palestinians in the world. My father left Palestine back in the 50s before the military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And when the occupation took place, he was outside of the country, thus, he was not able to return home. So he's not a refugee, he's from the West Bank, but he ended up not being able to return back to his birthplace and thus remained in America, became a US citizen, and until today, actually, he's not allowed to come back to Palestine until he's only able to come back to Palestine as a tourist. I was actually born in the United States. I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. I was very active politically around the Palestinian issue. And when the opportunity arose, which was actually after the Oslo peace accords were signed, I used that opportunity to relocate. I was married for 1 year to a Palestinian woman, and my wife came back home. I relocated from the States, from Youngstown to Ramallah, specifically to Al Bida, where I live. And the reason I came back was to actually participate in the establishment of the Palestine Telecommunications Company. It was one of the sectors, telecom was one of the sectors that was partially transferred to the Palestinian side during the Oslo process. So I came was hired by a group of investors to help them put together the company, which today is the largest private sector employer in Palestine, called the Palestine Telecommunications Company. And I've been here ever since. Did a couple things since then, but we had one daughter in the States, and we brought her back with us, of course, and we had a second daughter here. My older daughter is currently a junior at MIT studying chemical engineering, and my younger daughter is in the ninth grade here in Ramallah.
Okay, great. So, you're one of the founders of the nonprofit Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. Can you tell us about the goals of that organization and where did the idea come from?
Sure. Back in October of 2013, I made a speaking tour in 5 states in the United States, and one of the legs of that trip was in Chicago, Illinois. And a colleague of mine, a retired American business person, his name is Ed Thompson, uh, set up for me about a dozen or so events to speak at and people to meet. And after that trip, the idea came up that we want to be able to link Palestinian businesses and American businesses for the sake of supporting an independent Palestinian economy. That's very difficult given our economy is an occupied economy. It's militarily occupied by the Israeli military. And a lot of the donors who are working in our community, specifically Western donors or US oriented donors, always are trying to promote the Palestinian business world, but they're trying to do it with forcing us to work with Israeli business interests, which we see as a very awkward kind of approach. It's not a natural thing to do business with your military occupier because the imbalance of power which is on the ground translates into an imbalance of power within business relationships. So we're hoping to be able to convince the American business community that Palestine is an economy that's worth investing in for many reasons. First and foremost, because we are an economy and we do have things to offer from an investment perspective. For example, our tourism sector is only now just starting to become developed. And the example that I like to give most is, what hotel operator in the States would not like to have a property in Bethlehem? And Bethlehem being smack in the middle of the Palestinian areas, we want to be able to make that kind of a relationship happen. But I have a second reason why I'm focusing on business relations as well. It's because I believe in the US, which is a very important factor in this conflict, The business community has shied away from trying to understand reality on the ground. And through business relationships, we're hoping to educate a community of people who work within a business world of how difficult the Israelis have had it, how difficult it has been for us to be able to do business and how much restrictions the Israelis have placed upon us. We're hoping with the leverage of American businesses getting involved in helping us do business, that they would have some clout to be able to try to convince the Israelis, or at least reveal to the world what the Israelis are doing in the business community. So that's the first goal, linking businesses across Palestine and Israel, Palestine and America. The second goal of the organization is, to put it bluntly, take ownership of the concept positive investment. If you recall, during the last several years, many church organizations attempted to pass divestment from Israel resolutions, and the pro-Israeli lobby in the States blocked that and made it a major issue. And the way they blocked it is they created this concept of positive investment. I kind of joke when I say that because I've been working in the business community all my life, and I never heard anyone say, "Hey, I have a great negative investment. Would you like to invest?" The word investment is positive by definition.
Mm-hmm.
So when they added the word positive investment, what they were trying to do is to say that the only things worthy of investment in Palestine are investments that have Israeli involvement. So we want to be able to reframe that issue for it to be for positive investment to mean occupation-free investment as much as possible, understanding our reality. So we're not interested in normalizing a business community with the occupation. We want to remove the forced dependency that our business community has on the occupation, and we're hoping to be able to do that in this venue by involving Americans directly with the Palestinian economy.
That's amazing. That's really fascinating too, because I really didn't know anything about the Israeli quote positive investment. I mean, that's a subject that doesn't really get reported on much, at least not from what I've read.
You know, Katie, there's also a big thing that gets discussed around this issue. Many in the activist community feel that it's odd that we would be promoting Palestinian business while we're occupied. And I'd like to clarify how important it is that Palestinians on the ground find livelihood. Because if we understand this conflict as a political conflict, because that's what it is, it comes down to two very simple issues: land and people. And we can see what's happening to the land. I mean, if you drive around the occupied territory, you can see settlements, you can see an Israeli road network, you can see checkpoints. What we can't see easily is what's happening to the people. And what's happening to the people is that our economy is being suffocated by the Israeli military, trying to force people to fall into despair. So for every job we can create in Palestine, we are keeping a Palestinian on the ground, engaged, and if he has a job or she has a job, hopefully constructively engaged. So there is a kind of hidden agenda in supporting the Palestinian business community, and it is fully in line with resisting this occupation. But we do it through the business lens.
Yeah, and I want to mention, again, I mentioned in one of my earlier interviews, the documentary Donor Opium. It's about how investments from overseas and charity money from overseas is actually hurting the Palestinian business sector. And so if people haven't seen that documentary yet, I really recommend it. It's 20 minutes long and you can find it on YouTube. You've seen it, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, I have seen it. I actually am a founder of a community foundation here called Dahlia Association. And one of our goals is to be able to shed our dependency on donors, because the donor involvement has skewed our economy and has ripped apart the fabric of our society. And we need concentrated effort to be able to re-thread our society together. And one way in doing that is creating business relationships and opening markets for Palestinians to do business without the need for us to go through our occupier to be able to do that.
Fantastic. Those are excellent goals, and I totally support them. So, what are your immediate fundraising goals for Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy? Again, this is a nonprofit organization that you founded.
Yes, it's nonprofit. It's also just recently received its 501c3 tax deductible status in the States. Uh, we launched on 1/1/2015. We spent 2014 planning for the organization. When we launched, we actually hired a Palestinian consulting firm to go out in the market and actually vet and find for us opportunities, business opportunities that we can present to U.S. business interests. That consulting firm has started working, and we are attempting to fund their existence with us for at least a year to give them enough time to actually produce 30 investable kinds of projects. And we're doing this in a very transparent way. As we identify potential investments or business relationships, not necessarily financial investment, but maybe distribution agreements or others, we will be placing this information on our website, which is a4vpe.org, the number 4. And anyone interested to find out what kinds of opportunities that we feel are worthy of linking to a U.S. market will be able to see those and either contact them directly, or we'll be more than glad to facilitate contacting them. We are not being part of a transactional issue here. We are linking and matchmaking. We're not in the business of doing business. We're in the business of linking businesses together.
Okay, great. So, if your average middle class person wants to invest in the Palestinian economy or partner with Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy, what would that look like? Is that even something that a middle class person could do, or do you have to be really wealthy?
No, there's a lot that you can do at any level within the economy. And I'll mention a couple of them, but we'll be more than glad to receive inquiries from anyone who would like to discuss specific cases. If one wanted to invest directly into a Palestinian firm, they can look at the firms that we're going to present and contact them. At a smaller investment level, one can actually approach their community organization, whether it's a church or a solidarity movement within a specific community, and make an investment through their entity. Let's call it a church for the sake of our discussion. And that would be able to be an educational opportunity to get people aware and use their interest to be able to leverage that into a larger kind of investment. There's also different churches which have already started investment programs in Palestine that people can link into, whether it's the Presbyterian Church, the Lutheran Church, the Quakers, the Methodists. They all have programs here to be able to support Palestinian business. There's also several Palestinian projects which can be funded through the various crowdfunding websites that are out there, like Kivia or Kickstarter. I'm actually a mentor for one of the projects that's being done at Harvard University, which is also a startup. And we can point people in the direction of where these are. And that would be able to take a smaller amount of investment and put it in the pool of funds that others are putting in to be able to support a specific project. I should note that our work as Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy and the projects that we will present will be geographically spread from throughout Palestine, including the Gaza Strip. We believe that Gaza has a huge future for development. It's under distress right now, but the only way we're going to be able to contribute to removing that occupation's chokehold on Gaza is getting more people involved in raising the price of the occupation. So we're hoping that some Palestinian businesses see the potential development, for example, of the shore of Gaza, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, and have interest in wanting to develop that and put some pressure on the Israeli side to allow us and them to be able to access the Gaza Strip. So it'll be from Gaza, it'll be from throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So there are many different kinds of projects at various levels of investment and interest. But I need to reinforce, not everything we need is financial investment. For many of the companies here, opening up doors to a US market is much more valuable than an actual financial investment. So if we have a food supplier here, and we have many of them, for example, we have one that's producing a high quality honey. If someone can open a door for this company to be able to get their product on a chain of supermarkets in the States, that's much more valuable than just trying to invest in the company. So there's all different kinds of ways people can help the Palestinian business community sustain itself. And again, we'll be more than willing to entertain any kinds of inquiries that come through the website.
Yeah, I actually just ordered a bunch of really beautiful decorative tiles from the Palestinian tile factory in Hebron to decorate my house. And I'd love to see those sold here in the U.S. We
There's
have a,
actually, Katie, there's so many products here that are
yeah,
very applicable to the States. Easter is coming up. Bethlehem has some of the best souvenirs and woodworks and jewelry, I think something close to your heart as well,
yeah.
that people can link into. And some of this is already online, and they can reach it through the various sites of these companies. So if you want to be able to support Palestine's resistance against the occupation, there's many ways to do it. All we're saying is supporting the business community so people have a livelihood while they're sustaining their life under this very disastrous occupation. That would translate into either buying Palestinian products or helping Palestinian companies reach other markets. And there's many different ways to do it.
So let's talk about Gaza a little bit more. Is it possible right now to hire freelancers in Gaza, say, to do website design or management? And how would people go about doing that? And the reason I ask is because I'm sure you've heard of the websites odesk.com and fiverr.com, where people
Yes.
can hire people from all over the world to do small or medium length or even long term freelance jobs. And I was wondering if that's possible for people in Gaza to do that, or how do people reach people in Gaza?
Yes, it is possible. It's not easy these days. Gaza today has 12 to 18 hours without electricity. And that in itself speaks volumes. Having said that, my own personal firm, my consulting firm, Applied Information Management, we have a translation service, and most of my translators are in Gaza. And by the way, most of them happen to be women as well. So we try to bring in translation work, Arabic, English, Hebrew, and Spanish. The Arabic English is done in Gaza, and try to supply them with that pipeline of work. It has taken a lot of effort to be able to get them the generators and the fuel required to be able to operate their laptops. And we're jumping through hoops to make it happen, sometimes at a loss, but not always. So it is possible, not easy, mainly due to the failure of the electricity not being there 24/7, due to the Israeli restrictions placed on the amount of fuel that can come into the Gaza Strip. But we're doing the best with the resources that we have. And like any business under such distress, we do have backup plans and other people outside of the Gaza Strip to pick up where the Gazan community is not able to serve a specific client. So we can provide seamless service as a Palestinian company to an international client. But we'd like to note that we're trying to do as much as possible of that work in the Gaza Strip. And the other place that we try to support is East Jerusalem, which is also under distress these days from the Israeli practices. So where we can do the work in Gaza or East Jerusalem, we will. And if not, we will use resources in the West Bank or elsewhere to be able to get the work done.
So can you tell us a little bit about the situation with PayPal? I know, like, when I last checked, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza were not able to use PayPal because PayPal did not allow connections to Palestinian banks. And I saw this the most vividly, like the most egregious example of this inequality is on the website Etsy.com, which is where I sell my jewelry. And I see, loads and loads of Israeli designers on there. But the only Palestinians are the ones who live in Israel proper or in Jerusalem. And I thought that was just like so unfair, that Israelis are able to tap into the international market like that, but Palestinians aren't. So, do you know anything about the current situation with PayPal? And is there anything that the international community can do to move that issue forward?
It's a very good question. I don't know the details behind it, but yes, it's not a service that's available to Palestinians, and that's a problem. It's part of the financial infrastructure that would allow us to be able to link to the global market. Um, the issue has to do not only with PayPal, but with a lot of international organizations that only now are coming to the realization that the Palestinian market, is an economy separate from the Israeli economy. That to me is an opportunity for us to be able to educate as many of these companies as possible, and not only in a soft way of educating them, but also in a legal way of educating them. Any international company that continues to view the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem economy as part and parcel of their economic agreements with Israel is legally out of sync after, especially November 2012, when the majority of the world accepted Palestine as an observer state in the UN. And based on that UN resolution, they actually added Palestine to the lists of states in the world. So whether it's PayPal or Amazon or any of these companies, when you do the drop down box to go to the country, if Palestine is not listed, that company is behind the times. And that to me is an opportunity for us to approach the executives of the company and explain to them first and foremost the new state of affairs that happened in November, but more so, those companies that would like to contribute to a positive economic development in Palestine need to be able to provide these services and tools for us. In the meantime, some of the Palestinian banks, one in specific, the Bank of Palestine, has created a new product here. It's called PalPay instead of PayPal. And PalPay is basically a network of payment points of sale, which is developing very rapidly, hoping to pick up the gap of where the the PayPals of this world have failed. So
That's
we are
great.
trying in a very creative way to fill the gap. But as much as we do, it will not be able to be 100% because ultimately these international platforms are global platforms. And we just want to be part of those global platforms so we can do business worldwide and people can do business with us. I should note that there is not an issue with the banking system per se. The banking system here is a very vibrant banking system. It's a regulated banking system. It's part of the international and global banking system. So these companies cannot say that there's anything weak within the Palestinian banking system per se, because the banks work here and they do transfers abroad and everything is in place. It's just an executive decision at these companies to add Palestine into their lists of countries that are able to do business with them. So to me, it's an activist kind of task waiting to be addressed. And it can be addressed very concretely and very business-like as well, because this will add to their business revenue. We're not asking anything more than any other country asks for, which is to be part of their global networks.
So, can people in the international community use PalPay to hire Palestinians?
I
Or is it only
believe
for Palestinians to
I'll
use
need to
amongst
check.
themselves?
Right now, it's a domestic network.
Okay.
It was just launched several months ago. I believe their plans are to open it up for people abroad to be able to interface with the network, but I'll need to check exactly where it's at now. But there's many other ways as well. I mean, just straight bank transfers work as well. But there's other services that are out there that allow transfer of money, like Western Union and other services that do work here. So it's not a completely closed environment. It's just not totally open. And those are like you properly noted, we need to find where the global platforms are that are closing their doors to Palestine and tell them, open the doors to Palestine. It will help them as a business and it will help us develop. And if we develop, then we're creating a new reality on the ground. If the doors of the world remain closed to Palestine, we can only expect more violence and more occupation here. And that's the kind of equation we want to be able to present to American businesses and others.
So, aside from the checkpoints, the wall, and controlling entry into Palestine, can you give us some examples of how Israel further inhibits Palestinian economic development?
Yes, I can probably speak for 3 days on that topic. It's a big issue. In a nutshell, and I'm using my words very carefully, Israel controls, micromanages every single strategic economic asset for state building, whether it's land, water, which is very important in our part of the world, trade relations, movement and access, petroleum, electricity, you name the strategic economic resource, and it's the Israeli military who is in control of it. Some of those resources, some of the crumbs of those resources have been provided to the Palestinians. And we do the best we can with the crumbs that are thrown to us. But ultimately, if we're headed towards independent statehood, those economic resources will have to be released. One of the largest ones is a natural gas reserve off the coast in the Gaza Strip. That gas reserve has enough value to make us totally independent from the need of donors. So you can imagine, American tax dollars are propping up the Palestinian Authority. They're paying Palestinian Authority salaries, where if the American government would just use its leverage in getting Israel to allow us to tap our own natural gas, we wouldn't need those tax dollars to be able to sustain our reality here. So those economic resources are important for many, many reasons. First and foremost, to be able to build an economy that's worthy of a state, but also to relieve us from this donor dependency, which is really skewing the entire reality here, and in a way, propagating the occupation. Because today, Israel has an occupation which is a profitable occupation. They pay very little to be able to sustain an occupation. Actually, just the opposite. This is a profitable occupation. We are the second largest captive market to Israeli firms. So they're making a lot of money off of this occupation sustaining. So again, these economic resources are key to our development, and we're hoping that some even larger US companies will take note that we have some very strategic economic resources, and we want to be able to whet their appetite for them to see that there's a potential business interest here for them. But for them to be able to benefit from it, like us, we need their support to convince the American government and others to be able to get Israel to remove the boot of occupation from our neck.
Okay, so you wrote an article about your proposal of how to move forward should John Kerry fail in his negotiations, and clearly he has. So can you tell us about your proposal and how it's being received?
Yes, very, very briefly. It's actually a joint effort between myself and a British researcher. His name is Tony Klung. And we looked in April of 2014, long before the Palestinian leadership took a move at the UN to try to set a date for ending the occupation. We looked at this issue and we basically came up with the following. We basically said that 50 years of occupation, because that's what we're embarking on in 2017, 50 years of this occupation is way too long. And we basically say that there's two huge ambiguities that the Israeli side is using to sustain this occupation. The first is they don't recognize it as a military occupation. And the entire world, including the US, recognizes the state of affairs here as a military occupation, which means the Fourth Geneva Convention applies. And we think, number one, the Israelis should be called on that ambiguity. They need to be asked clearly by the international community, do they recognize this as an occupation or not? If it's recognized as an occupation, then the second ambiguity comes in. Is 50 years not enough to decide that it needs to end? And if it's not an occupation, like the current Israeli government continues to tell us, then we expect third states to start dealing with Israel as a state which is prohibiting subjects under its control from having their rights. And we can keep talking about two states until we're blue in the face. But in the meantime, we should not accept one more day where the entity which is in control from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River is prohibiting half the people living under their control of having water rights, health rights, political rights. And so we're basically saying, let's put the ball squarely in the Israeli lap. Call it an occupation or not. If it's not, then we're looking for citizenship within Israel, or at least equal treatment instead of discrimination. And if it is an occupation, then let's just set a deadline. We think 50 years is plenty, so we know that it's going to end. But we cannot remain in this world of ambiguity where the occupation is spoken about as if it can live forever as we're negotiating. Negotiating an endgame may take another 100 years. If anyone thinks the Palestinians are going to remain silent and subdued during these next 100 years, has not read history. And we can see that now. The level of violence is already increasing against the occupation. And what we're saying is, let's not let it roll out of control. Let's at least give the Palestinians a clear deadline of when this will end. And that's an issue that the international community has to step up to the plate for, because we as Palestinians are not able to do it ourselves.
So, at this point in time, what, in your opinion, do you think is the most important way people in the international community can support Palestinians?
Many ways. First and foremost is to organize in a much more sustainable kind of way. And I'm going to be very frank here because I think, especially in the activist community and in the solidarity community, because wherever you step foot in the world, you will find pockets of solidarity with Palestinians. And when Israel attacks Gaza, within hours, there are demonstrations across the world calling for it to stop. And those are always needed. But I think what's missing in the equation is more long-term organizing and long-term planning. I'm working within the business realm, as I noted before, but there's many different areas that we can work on a more long-term basis. And I think one component of how to think forward of supporting Palestine is to come down to a sectorial level. Not everybody should be expected to help everything, but rather we should look at the health world and see how can healthcare workers around the world support the Palestinian healthcare system. The same for education, the same for culture, the same for arts, the same for business. And as we bring these communities which are already having a common language together, then I think we have the ingredients to have a sustained relationship to be able to improve reality on the ground, both in resisting the occupation as well as much as possible, building for a free Palestine. And that's not an easy task. But it can't be done only through spontaneous kinds of demonstration activities. It has to be done in a more structured and long-term kind of fashion.
Okay, great. So Sam has given everybody, all the listeners out there, a lot of brand new ideas about how to support the Palestinian struggle. So I want to thank you very much, Sam, for taking your time to be with us today. And I want to support the work you're doing with Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. So this month, the month of March 2015, I'm going to give $7 of every purchase of jewelry and apparel to Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. So if you were considering buying something, now is a great time. You can help get their project moving forward. So thank you again very much, Sam, for being with us.
Thank you.